Alrighty then, let's get everything checked out to make sure it's all working. I did a lousy job of getting ready today. I think it has something to do with the time change. So give me a comment out there if there is anyone there to let me know that there's someone listening to me while I get things finished setting up. I'm a little bit out of sorts, probably like a lot of you out there, because of the time change. We also recently adopted, well, he kind of adopted us, a stray geriatric cat, and he doesn't sleep more than a couple hours at a time, so we don't get a lot of sleep these days because he wakes us up a lot at night. So, just drop me a hello, let me know where you're from in the comments, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'll wet my whistle a little bit. Hi Kato, how are you doing today? Alrighty, I think we're good to go. Can you hear me? I'm hoping you can hear me. Yep, it looks like this microphone is working, so let's get started. Hello Charlie, how are you doing? So, hello my lovelies. I was recently asked why I don't do a lot more actual sewing focused videos, and that made me really stop and think about that and how to answer that question. And the short answer is I don't need a lot more clothes, and so when I do my sewing, it's because I really need whatever it is that I'm sewing. So most of my clothes go into my modern wardrobe, although I also do medieval recreation, the Society for Creative Anachronism, so I do make some costumes. So it's either what I need for my modern wardrobe or what I need for the SCA and playing in the SCA and doing that medieval reenactment. And that made me also stop and think about sort of the trends that I've been seeing on YouTube and why they were making me a little bit uneasy. And what I'm seeing is that for some people, it seems that home sewing is imitating fast fashion. We've all seen the videos of making 5 outfits in a day or making a wardrobe in a week. And so this fast fashion consumption behavior is really seeping into our creative spaces. And so I thought I would take today and talk about that. So Kato, I hope it's not too late. And if it's too late, you have hot cocoa or something to help you keep warm and stay awake. Charlie, yes, it is a lot of work to film sewing. And I have ADHD, so sometimes I forget to film whole sections of my sewing. And so when I'm trying to edit the video, it's like, this is not as good as I want it to be. And then perfectionism comes in, and they're all arguing with each other, perfectionism and forgetfulness. And yeah, my brain is a crazy place sometimes. So if you're new here, my name is Althea, and I'm here to talk all about having ADHD, all things history bounding, historical clothing, so that you can creatively thrive through the art of sewing. So today let's chat about some of the reasons why we need to think critically about why and how we home sewists create and consume materials in our creative endeavors. We can start by understanding a little bit more about what fast fashion is and the impact that it's having on our environment and on our cultures. So fast fashion is a manufacturing method focused on getting trendy, cheap clothing to the consumer quickly and in massive amounts. There is no intention of producing just enough clothing for the market, but rather to flood the market with wares, knowing that most of those clothing are going to end up in a landfill within a year. So fast fashion is all about cheap manufacturing, frequent consumption, and short-lived garment use. Yes, Kato, hot cocoa. I have my hot tea because my throat gets dry during these talks. I when in my day job I used to do a lot of public speaking, and after the COVID, I'm a little bit out of practice for speaking for more than a few minutes at a time. So I have my tea here. So sláinte. And before we go any further, really, I want to acknowledge the economic elephant in the room. So, for for many people, fast fashion is what is affordable to them, and there's a reason why Shein is so popular with younger folks. And I'm not here to be a gatekeeper because not everyone is going to be able to afford those more sustainable clothing options. That's not a consumer issue. That is not on the consumer. This is a capitalism issue. And as long as corporations are allowed to monetize and profit from the continued unfettered destruction of our environment, they're going to do so. And it's our children and our grandchildren that are going to pay the price for it. So consumers can make a choice that is appropriate to them. While we continue to work towards holding corporation and the wealthy who own them accountable for the damage being done to our environment and to our future. So I'm going to step down from that soapbox now and come back to the fashion industry. So we do a lot of historical talking here, so let's talk about blah, blah, blah. So we talk about historical clothing here a lot. So let's start with a little bit of history. And the rise of the modern fashion industry. So before the mid-19th century, all clothing was individually made by hand and for specific individuals. There were no department stores. There was no online shopping. So from the medieval period on, specialists in fiber production, dyeing, weaving, finishing, they all started to develop their trade and to really niche down so that a person or a family or a group of people would start to specialize. So, some areas were known for their dyeing, and some areas were known for weaving, and some areas were known for fiber production. Hello, Amaris. Glad you could join us. We're doing great. We all have our warm adult, well, I don't know if you're having an adult beverage. This is ginger tea. So even with textiles being available for purchase, often households raised or grew plants and animals for fiber and for clothing production at home. The industrial development in the mid-19th century allowed machine assistance at all stages of clothing production from field to consumer. Textiles and clothing could be made faster, and purchasing ready-made clothing became the norm by the beginning of the 20th century. Now, the fashion industry works on what's called the fashion calendar. You're probably familiar with this already. So early in the 20th century, fashion and design houses settled on a calendar of offering 4 collections a year. That's spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And as the century progressed, additional seasons were added to schedules. Additional seasons were added to the schedule, such as resort collections that started to emerge mid-century. After World War II, technological, cultural, and social shifts really increased the speed at which fashion houses released collections, and consumers became addicted to that constant barrage of new designs. So by the end of the 20th century, clothing producers were generating massive amounts of clothing with daily releases of new items. And most of this clothing ends up in a landfill within a few years. The modern clothing consumption trends have really changed. And this is a serious issue, because by 2025, the fashion industry is going to top about $1 trillion per year. That's 3 years from now. $1 trillion would nearly wipe out all federal student debt, so put that number in perspective. Counting all the different aspects of the fashion industry, from agricultural fiber production to e-commerce, the fashion industry is the largest economic sector in the world. My guess is, munitions and warmongering is a close second because, at least you can look good while you kill people. China is by far the largest consumer of fashion, at twice as much as the second consumer, the US, followed by the UK, Japan, and Germany. So the imperial core countries account for the vast majority of clothing and textiles consumption. And what happens is that waste is pushed down into the colonized countries where the import of these, surplus clothes is creating a serious economic and environmental issues in some of these colonized countries. The COVID epidemic really threw a spanner into the works, and the fashion industry is just now finding equilibrium. The lockdowns led to a huge spike in consumer demand at the same time that supply chains and manufacturing shut down. I mean, we all remember the great toilet paper shortage of 2020. And the ability to purchase online and the consumer expectation of instant gratification really has created a juggernaut of wasteful production and spending, which brings us back to fast fashion and why is it so harmful? Well, the first way that fast fashion is harmful is the environment. It creates 22 million tons of waste and about 79 trillion liters of water waste or water consumption during the process from agricultural production to end-use consumer. So the industry produces 8 to 10% of the global carbon CO2 emissions, and that's about 4 to 5 billion tons annually. The fashion industry is also a major consumer of water, so it takes water to grow fiber. It takes water to grow cotton. Cotton is an intensely water sucker up. It takes a lot of water to grow cotton. Even organic cotton is still problematic because of the fact that so much water goes into the production. Linen is the same. You still have to produce wool. You have to water the animals. So water is a huge resource that is being used by the fashion industry. The fashion industry is also responsible for about 20% of industrial water pollution from the textile treatment and the dyeing. Whenever you see acid-washed jeans, you know that a lot of water went into the production of that look. It also contributes about 35% of the oceanic microplastic pollution, and it also produces vast quantities of textile waste. And much of that ends up in landfills or is burnt, including the unsold products. So global per capita textile production, for instance, has increased from 5.9 kilograms to 13 kilograms per year over the period from about 1975 to around 2020. So global consumption has also risen quite a bit and is projected to reach about 102 million tons by 2030, and that's only 8 years away. So fashion brands are now producing almost the twice amount of clothing compared to before the year 2000. Fast fashion relies on impulse buying and creating a sense of urgency, and the number of collections per year has doubled from the pre-2000 era. And textile and fashion consumption is increasing 2% a year. So in the US, the average consumer now purchases one item of clothing every 5.5 days. And in Europe, a 40% increase in clothing purchases was observed from the 1990s until the mid-2010s. And as a result, more new clothes are bought per person, and there's just more being produced. At the same time, the garment use has decreased by 36%. The time that a garment is in use has decreased by 36%, with some purchases often only being worn a few times before being discarded. So the globalization of the fashion industry means that while the imperial core countries are the main consumer of fast fashion, the environmental impacts are largely borne by the colonized countries, and this is the same sort of across the whole climate change spectrum. So when we're looking at home sewing, and we're seeing these trends towards, these making 5 garments in one day, or making a wardrobe in a week, or the home sewing channels where, they're producing new things every single week, that's mimicking the same kind of consumption patterns that we see in fast fashion. And so while I know that what I see in YouTube is not reality, there's so many videos on sewing multiple garments a day or a whole wardrobe in a week and such like. And it just seems to me that this is another manifestation of fast fashion. This is another consumption mindset. There is a whole psychology behind the need to constantly consume and acquire and stash and hoard. For YouTubers, the make it in a day videos makes the algorithm happy, and because the viewers watch them. But for most of us, the need to consume is both internally and externally motivated. Because externally, capitalism is really good at manipulating you to want things that you don't really need. Heck, you probably don't even want them before some media put the thought into your head. The Shein TikTok haul videos are a perfect example of these. These videos have been a major driver of the success of Shein. The videos create a cycle. So the influencer puts out a video of a haul. The influencer is the viewer is influenced to purchase the garments in the video, and then the influencer puts out another haul video, and the viewer buys the garments in the new video, and so on and so on and so on. And so, this is less on the influencer, who is often, a young white woman just trying to use the available levers to make a living, rather than putting the blame where it really truly belongs, on the corporations who exploit labor and natural resources, and the governments who don't regulate those corporations. Speaking of governments, the U.S. midterm elections are this week, so please go vote. Your voice is very important. If it wasn't, they wouldn't be trying so hard to keep you from voting. PSA over, and back to our regular programming. So we've all heard the phrase, "They who die with the most fabric wins." And so let's look at what that phrase really means. Again, like much in our modern culture, it glorifies consumption for consumption's sake. We grew up with this aphorism. It's cute, it's quaint. We print it on t-shirts, and we make wall art with the saying. We humble brag about our fabric stashes, saying that we have too much stuff, but we will keep buying fabric anyway, because they who die with the most fabric wins, right? We have been taught to consume without thinking. We sew sometimes without thinking. We add to our fabric stash, and then we de-stash when the gravitational pull of all that massed fabric becomes overwhelming and threatens to become a singularity. It's a cycle that we really need to break. And this leads us back to why we sew in the first place. We want clothing that fits us, or we like the creative expression and artistry. We want clothing that is well made. There's many reasons why we sew. If you are a sewer out there, put in the comments why you sew. For me, I have an odd to fit body, and it's hard for me to find basically out of the box clothing that fits. That's one reason why I really like the brand Ishakti, because you can get garments made to your own measurements. And then you know that that garment is not made until you order it, so it's less likely to create waste. Um, you will never see me do a haul video of things that I have bought new. In fact, I think I have one haul video on the channel, and that is for some vintage sewing books that I purchased at my favorite bookstore in the world, which is Roberts Books in Lincoln City, Oregon. I will unashamedly share videos of my used book purchases, especially if they're vintage sewing books. So when we're looking at this, there's a lot of alternatives to fast fashion and fast sewing. and so let's talk about that. And as I'm sharing some of these ideas, if you have ideas, feel free to leave them in the comments, and we can chat about those too. So obviously the biggest the biggest thing that you can do, the most effective thing you can do, is buy secondhand. And it's probably the most common go-to when talking about better sustainability in the fashion industry and in home sewing. And for some people, thrifting is a sport, so there really should be an Olympics for it. I mean, I love going thrifting, going to yard sales and estate sales, and just sort of generally poking around other people's goodies, but it's getting harder to thrift and find the gems like we used to, because fast fashion is destroying thrifting and the secondhand markets. It's becoming harder and harder to find good quality clothing in secondhand stores at the same time as the prices in the thrift store and the secondhand market are rising. Hi, Rhea Sky. I am glad that you could join us. Yeah, sometimes the notification for YouTube and these things is not as ideal. If you join the Facebook group, I do post out and tend to remind people that this is coming up. And if you have a larger body, it can be extra hard to find clothes secondhand. It is extremely frustrating for people in larger bodies when we see videos or blog posts of some smaller person taking a well-made plus-size garment and cutting it down to fit them. So, you know, if you have a smaller body, kind of think twice about taking clothes away from the people with larger bodies and shop with compassion. There's a lot of also economically disadvantaged people that do rely on secondhand clothes for professional wear. So just when you are thrifting, being mindful, I'm not saying don't ever do it, but do be mindful of the impact further on in the food chain. So we can look for ways to creatively use secondhand fabric to reduce your need to buy new. I mean, we've all heard of buying old sheets to use for your mock-ups, but there's some gold in secondhand shops. I've found woolens and silks and linens in thrift stores. Just be very careful when using drapes and home decor fabric. They often have finishes that are not good for wearing on the skin. Some of them have been waterproofed. Ask me about the dress I made out of a fiberglass curtain back in the day when I was a newbie sewer. Ouch. We all make mistakes along the way. Another way that you can cut down on consumption of new and adding to that burden is trading clothes and fabrics. You can get friends together and have a wine and swap. Bring the clothes, the fabrics, and the notions that you no longer need, and you can swap them for something useful to you. And you can take this opportunity to de-stash and clear out your fabric storage and closets. And the bonus, of course, is, you know, bonus wine, and always a good time with friends. Yeah, Kato says that she sews because she's picky, and I think that is a lot of us. Is we're familiar with what good clothing should be and look like, and we're not seeing that in the store at a price we can afford, so we make it. Yeah, yeah, that fiberglass. I only wore it once. It was for a really shishi event, a cocktail party. I looked fabulous, and there was lining. It's just some of the fibers managed to make it through the lining, um, but it was beautiful. It was this beautiful light blue and silver matelaise. So it had a really pretty powdery blue background and silver thread sort of brocade with matelaise. So you had that three dimensionality, and it was just, oh, the fabric was so pretty. Mm. And I made a 1980s dress with the big sleeves and the body conscious thing when I had a body to be conscious with. um, so the next thing that you can think of doing is buying from ethical brands. And I just want to put it out there, and I'm not throwing shade on any of the companies that are trying to be ethical, but there is no such thing as a truly sustainable clothing brand. Some companies do the best they can, but waste is so pervasive that only a total overhaul of the entire textile and fabric production system is ever going to produce sustainable clothing practices. So when you're looking at these ethical brands, do your homework and don't fall for the corporate greenwashing. Kit says that they make clothes because they're plus size, short torso, and have sway back, so nothing fits right. Represent, Kit, because that is me. I have the very same problem, so maybe we can swap patterns someday. Another thing that you can do is learn to remake and mend and repair what you already have. This is historically accurate to remake and refashion garments to give them a fresh look. And this is one of the reasons why clothing from earlier periods doesn't often survive until the modern era, is because they reused all of that fabric. And so it's really satisfying to repair something and extend the life of a garment. Bernadette Banner just recently put out a book, and once I get this organized in the description, I'll put a link down below, and I'll put a link to my bookshop on mending books and how to reuse fabrics. I have purchased knit garments on eBay that have had small holes in them, so I get them super cheap. Being slightly damaged drops the price significantly, so I can afford nicer cashmere and merino wool. Darning and repairing knits is really extremely satisfying. And I'm working on a camel colored cashmere sweater right now that had some pretty significant holes in it, so I'm repairing it and I'm kind of embroidering little flowers around it, and I'll post pictures to my Instagram when I get done. And then another thing that we can do is buy quality where possible. If anyone out there is a Terry Pratchett fan, you will be familiar with the Vimes economic theory of boots. And it kind of goes like this. People in an upper people in an upper economic situation can go out and buy boots for $150, and those boots are going to be well made, and they're going to last 20, 30 years with careful care. So over 20, 30 years, the wealthy person will have paid $150. The poorer person can only afford to pay $50 for a pair of boots, but they only last 5 years. So after 20 years, the poorer person will have spent $200 or more on boots over time. So it's important to buy quality where possible. And I know this is often preached, but if you have the means, do it. And this is kind of where thrifting comes in. You can buy oftentimes thrifted clothing that's much better made than poorer quality garments. And spending more on quality fabric when you sew will also make the garments you sew much longer. And I know that this isn't available to everyone, but if you can do it, do it. Yes, Kit, the boot theory. I'm a huge Terry Pratchett fan. He's probably one of the most brilliant philosophers of our time. And quite honestly, I channel Granny Weatherwax more often than I probably should. So another thing that you can do is shop locally from local fashion brands and fabric shops that are produced locally. The reality is that the fashion industry is based on exploitive labor practices. The people who sew fast fashion do so at near slave wages. They earn pennies for the garments that you wear. Shopping locally means that you can often get to know the people who make your garments or sell your fabric. So cultivate that kind of connection to the things that you wear and sew. The U.S. used to produce a great deal of fabrics, and fabrics used to be produced in Europe and all around the world. Now most textiles come from China. And there are still some textile manufacturers in the U.S. and around, Europe and other places. So you probably have local textile manufacturers that you can access locally produced textiles. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we have Pendleton Woolens. I know that Ukraine produces a lot of linens. So you can find locally sourced textile manufacturers. And then, of course, where possible, buy union-made clothing. It's super hard to find the union label these days, but they are out there. Start asking the places where you shop to provide union-made clothing. That way you will know that the people making your clothing are making a living wage and are working in safe conditions. I mean, that's the whole point of unions, really, is to make sure that workers have fair wages and safe working conditions. So we should all support those ideals where we can. Yeah, Kit, it is really super dangerous being about an hour, 20 minutes away from the Pendleton Wool outlet. I have spent a fair amount over the years there. Charlie, Granny Weatherwax. Granny Weatherwax is a character in the Discworld series of books that are written by Sir Terry Pratchett. They're sort of fantasy, comedy, farcical, fun books that are dripping with philosophy and wittiness and just clever ways of phrasing things. And I think that Terry Pratchett has produced some of those memorable characters in modern literature. I am a total fangirl. So I highly recommend that you check out those Discworld books, because Granny Weatherwax, Lady Sybil, Magrat, Granny Og, or Nanny Og, they're, all the sisters are really great characters that we can really enjoy reading about. Okay, there's my plug for Terry Pratchett, which seems to show up in every single one of my videos because I am super fangirl. Another way that we can keep our home sewing and our consumption from becoming fast fashion is ditch the trends and channel the classics. I mean, one of the reasons why you sew is to have unique clothing, so lean into that. That's the beauty of history bounding, really. We may be following trends, but they are 50 to 100 or more years old. So we set our own fashion trends. This is a men's woolen Fair Isle sweater that I bought used. I'm not sure how old it is. Got it off of eBay. I have a real problem with eBay. That's where my consumption really is, buying these used garments there. But it's such a super quality. I know that if I take care of it, this thing is going to outlast me. So following trends really implies that there is planned obsolescence and that you expect things to have a short lifespan. And we really need to flip that thinking to see how long we can possibly make things last. I mean, take it as a personal challenge to wring every bit of life out of the things you buy. And that goes beyond fashion too, with the repair movement. Wearing classical styles or history bounding means that we don't have to follow the trends in textiles either. This really allows you to be more strategic with your shopping. I mean, if you know that you're going to be using a narrow band of types of fabric, your stash does not need to be filled with impulse purchases. You can shop strategically. The sales, I mean, if you know you're going to be using a lot of white linen, which almost every historical sewist does, you can save money and buy by the bolt, or go in with friends who need the same thing and split a bulk purchase. Another thing is, don't buy or sew more than you need. That's going back to the original reason that I went on this rant to begin with, is just remember that the what you see on YouTube, I mean, even this is not reality. I never wear makeup day to day. And so when you see them producing all of these clothing, we just know that that's not necessarily what we want to be emulating. And the most important thing really is that we don't need most of the crap we buy. Our brains have been manipulated into thinking we need, but we don't. We don't really need stuff. I mean, our ancestors would be awed by the amount of stuff we own, but in the end, stuff ends up owning us. The rise of Marie Kondo and minimalism is somewhat a response to the overconsumption of goods in modern societies. Because I'm gonna get real here and ask you, do you really need all of that fabric and other stuff that is clogging up your spaces? I mean, I've gone through several fabric purges, and I'm getting ready to do another. I want to be able to fit everything into a smaller space. My stash is mostly where I want it to be, but I have a lot of accumulated stuff that I bought without thinking that I would make something from it someday, and that someday hasn't happened, so out it goes. And so one of my main motivations for wanting to destash, other than just I want to get that stuff out of my space so I can think, is I want to be able to make it easier to film videos here in my sewing studio. So my studio is going to be getting a makeover in the future, so keep an eye out for those videos next year. And so at the end of the day, we look at our things that we have around us, and we need to start asking ourselves, do we need those things? Do I need to buy this? Working on impulse shopping, that used to be a huge problem for me, because I had to unsubscribe from every fabric online shop place there is, because my lizard brain would ping whenever there was a great sale, because you might need to that someday, or you think of something you can sew for that. So I got rid of all of those store newsletters for fabric stores and for fashion retailers, and it has made it much easier to avoid those impulse fabric shopping. My main vice these days is creeping and looking around eBay for really cool little vintage pieces like this. Um, yeah, so let's check out what's happening in the chat. So Ria says that she picks a mending color for the year, and all the patches and darning is that color. Oh, I love that. It'd be a great way to use up some of the stash of yarn that I know most of you probably already also have. I've been given yarn over the years. In the SCA, I was princess of a local principality a couple of times, and I was gifted a lot of skeins of wool. And my squirrel and magpie brain just squirreled that all away for the someday that going to learn to knit. But it's also been a great source for embroidery and for darning and for mending things. Yeah, Kit says she's getting into the embroidery, so that's something that she plans on adding to her mending. Yeah, I love that when you're mending something, you don't make it visible. You make it visible so that is becomes a feature, and so that people can appreciate the fact that you enjoy that garment and you think that garment is valuable enough to go through the effort of fixing it. What else is going on in the chat? Charlie says that they have clothes that they bought and still wear 30 years later. Yeah, I mean, clothes used to be made in a way that they would last, and quite honestly, I haven't found anything sewn modernly that I thought would last a significant amount of time. Either the garment will give out or the fabric is going to give out. And so that's why we sew. Yeah, Kit says yarn is a problem. Yes. That is that is the burden of someone who spins, is the abundance of having yarn. And Charlie says that there's a way to mend something using embroidery. Yeah, the Pinterest is all over this, and mending and embroidery is a great search term to go into Pinterest if you have a need to go down that rabbit hole. Kit is lucky because their roommate knits shawls and socks. There's nothing like hand knit garments, and someday I would love to learn to knit, because I have expensive tastes when it comes to knitwear, and which is why I buy a lot of my knitwear used, because I can't afford what I really want new. So that brings me to the end of my prepared statements. Just wanted to see if anyone had any questions. Yeah, hand knit wool socks. Oh my gosh, that's like nirvana. You get a nice soft wool. It's just amazing. Yeah, Charlie, fisherman sweaters. That was my most recent purchase on eBay. Is I've needed a sweater for gardening. It gets very wet and cold here in the winter, but I still need to be out in the garden doing things. And so I've wanted a thick wool fisherman sweater that I can felt a little bit. So I bought an extra large one that I can felt down a little bit, so that when I wear it, there's a little bit of waterproofness. So I'm looking forward to getting that piece and working on it. Amara's Grandma had left over some Chinese brocade, and so she made a mini skirt that even had leftover, so that she can make a detachable bow for a skirt and a scrunchie. That's awesome. Okay, if there is not any questions, I'm going to log off and I will join you all over in the chat. So until next time, get vaxxed, stay safe, and I bid you joy. And check out this other video that the algorithm thinks you will enjoy. Bye-bye.